Hi everyone, it's Amy and Maggie from ThinkerThemer, and we are back, but this time we're doing a little Shelfworthy video with 2 games instead of 1.
2 for 1.
Because as if it wasn't hard enough for us to do a short format video about 1 game, now we're trying to cram in 2. But that's because we have 2 games that belong to the same collection. They're both by Bitewing Games, and they are number 1 and number 2 of the Mythos collection. We have Iliad and Ichor, and they're both by Reiner Knizia. They're both abstract games, and so we thought we should compare and contrast them to see which one you should pick up, if any are for you. So let's get into it.
And let's start with the first one, which is Iliad. Now in Iliad, we are finding ourselves in the middle of the Trojan War, and we're going to be playing either as Hector or Achilles, and we're going to be trying to, well, gain supremacy in battle and gain the divine favor of the gods through not just brute force, but really cleverly outwitting our opponent, potentially even leveraging their power against them.
Now, Iliad is actually a brand new design for Reiner Knizia, and it's really easy to learn and teach. When you set it up, it's just a material board that is an abstract grid, as is common in these types of games. And essentially every row and column has a scoring token that's at the end of it. Now, players on their turn are going to be placing out a tile. They're choosing from one of 2 tiles in their hand, placing it down somewhere on the board where they can place it legally. And then when a row or column is completed, we're going to sum the numbers in that row or column, and whoever has the highest sum gets first pick of the scoring tokens. But it's not just as simple as that, because some of the tiles that players will be placing have special abilities. Like they might allow you to move your or your opponent's tiles around in the board. They might allow you to swap one of your scoring tokens with one that's out there in the market. Or the 4s, you can place them out, but if you choose to, you can turn over that very powerful 4 in order to turn over an opponent's tile that's adjacent to that 4. So there's lots you can do in order to disrupt the scoring of this game. But of course, in true Reiner Knizia style, the funkiest thing about this game is the scoring, because in this game, your objective is to get all 5 of the scoring tiles that relate to each of the different gods. So there's 5 gods. If you can collect those and your opponent doesn't, you instantly win. However, if you both achieve that objective, then it's going to come down to the points, and that's the only time where the points that you've collected actually matter. So about halfway through the game, you're trying to assess, am I going to achieve this? Is my opponent going to achieve this? And if not, have I got enough points to win? So that's what makes this pretty interesting.
Now, in terms of how this felt to play, obviously, as you may have gathered even from the description and the images, it's an incredibly abstract experience. At no point did I feel like, oh, I am definitely Hector in this, and I'm so yeah. But having said that, I do enjoy the fact that it's relatively snappy, because you only have that choice of 2 possible tiles to place, and also you have this limitation that you can only go adjacent to something that's already been placed. So it makes things a little bit more snappy. But also, wait, I've got one more thing. I actually quite enjoyed those little powers, because there's only like a few of them, but they add enough. I mean, you go, ooh, wait a second, what could I do? How can I change the state of things?
But this game is highly tactical, because you have to respond to exactly what your opponent is doing, and you also don't know what the next tile is that you're going to pick up, and so you have limited options available to you, and you're just trying to do the best you can with what you have. And so that element of the game, I think, is going to dictate whether you like it or not. First, it's really abstract. Second, there's a lot of maths involved. So you're constantly summing who's got more points, blah, blah, blah. Should I shut this one off, or do I have an opportunity to move a tile out of it and then win? And do I really care about that row or column anyway because of the scoring tiles that are there? And so if you don't like that style game, this is not going to be for you. But for me, I also found it less strategic than Ichor, which we'll talk about later. But this one is very highly tactical. I also didn't really enjoy the fact that there was a lot of randomness in the order of the tiles in which they came out. And for the most part, that's fine, because it's a short tactical game. But sometimes, if the first 3 things that you pull, the 3 3s, which allow you to swap a scoring tile, they're not very useful to you at the beginning of the game. And so, you can run into a little bit of bad luck.
Look, the fates may be against you. what can I say? Something that was unexpected with this game for me was the fact that I actually really enjoyed the tempo of it. The fact that you have a limited number of tiles, all of those tiles are eventually going to get placed, and you're also sort of tracking, okay, you can sort of tile count, because and go, oh, okay, I can see all of Amy's 5s are out, or all of my, there's this really cool tile that is like you actually just absorb the values of the tiles adjacent to you. So it's like, oh, all of my ones are out. So I actually enjoy that as you're kind of coming close to the end, you're going, or you're having to like midway through go, I'm not going to get all 5 colors. Let's pivot. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I thought, okay, interestingly, what surprised me is this was one of my most anticipated games of the year, and I really didn't like it the first time I played it. The first time I played it, I was like, I don't know, I wanted there to be more, and I'm not quite sure. But then I came to kind of appreciate its simplicity. I really like that it's quick to set up, quick to teach, and then we could just start going immediately with another game. And then, as Maggie said, eventually I could start to kind of math out what I would expect her to have in her hand in the later stages of the game. So I did enjoy that, but overall, because of its high tactical nature, I think that's the reason why I didn't like it as much as some abstract games. And that kind of leads me into thinking about whether I would keep this in my collection or not. And the answer to that is really like, there's something I'd like to change about this game. This game for me is the perfect travel game, or it would be if it wasn't in such a big box. And it's not really a big box if you've got it on your shelf, that's fine, but it's not like throwing it in your travel bag kind of size either. And actually, it's really just because of the thickness of the tiles that stops it from being super portable. But I was able to fit all of the components into the bag that they include to
very
randomize.
chunky bag that ended up being a bit like...
It was quite full, but you could, if you wanted to, just take that bag with you and take it to a con or take it when you travel. And, you know, for that purpose, it would be perfect just because of the length of the game and the fact that, you know, you can play it when you're pretty tired because there's not that many rules to think about.
Yeah, for me, it's just... you know, it's an abstract game. I'm not into chess. I'm not into checkers. I'm not into anything that's just like, okay, well, this here, that there. I did sort of, as I said, I did enjoy the sort of the powers that it gives you, but ultimately it's literal lines of numbers, rows and columns of numbers. So,
yeah, maths a board game. But anyway, Iliad, I give a 7.4. For me, for all the reasons I've mentioned, probably won't stay in the collection, but I do want to talk about the differences with Ichor. But quickly, what was your rating of Iliad?
So my rating is actually, I'm going to give this a 7 because I actually enjoyed myself more than I thought I would, considering how abstract a setup it is.
Okay, so now let's talk about Ichor, which is number 2 in the Mythos collection.
Yeah, Ichor is also set in the world of Greek mythology, but this is all about the fight in the Mount Olympus, and it's the gods versus the monsters. Playing very, very asymmetrically as well.
Yeah, different to Iliad, which is completely symmetric. This is asymmetric, and this is actually not a new Reiner Knizia design. This is a re-implementation of an older title. But in Ichor, you again have that lovely grid of rows and columns, but this time you're going to set players up kind of like a game of checkers or chess, where you have 2 rows, one player playing monsters and the other player playing gods, and those gods or monsters are determined by a randomized shuffle of some cards, so the characters are a little bit different across each game as well. Now, the movement in Ichor is actually really simple. You can just move your god or monster as far as you can until it hits another player piece, whether it's your own or your opponent's, or the edge of the board. And as you move that piece, you are dropping little tokens behind you, leaving a little trail. And the objective of the game is to get all of your trail pieces, your tokens, onto the board. If you can do that, then you win the game. But again, it's not that easy. It's a little bit spicier than that because all of the gods and monsters have individual powers that can be used once during the game, and they're all very powerful, which is why you can only use them once. But once you've used them, you turn their cards over, and now you know that now they're just going to be a regular boring piece. And so you need to time the use of those player powers really carefully in order to try and take the win. Now, this one feels quite different than Iliad when you play it. It's less tactics, more strategy, and you know, this game is really interesting because I think a lot of people are going to struggle with their first games of this because what happens is you can get very quickly into a game of stalemate where you're moving around and just gobbling up the other player's piece, and then they're moving over you, and so you're just constantly taking your pieces off, putting the other player's pieces on. It's just like, and you're not really getting anywhere. It took a few games in to realize that you actually need to try and lock up the other player's pieces so that they can't move. And sometimes it's better to go a shorter distance in order to hamstring kind of the other player rather than to sweep across the board and take tokens. You need to kind of think a few steps ahead.
Yeah, the other thing is there's so many different powers, and because again, like as Amy said, you actually have even more cards of different gods and monsters than what you play with in any given game. There is that initial sort of mini overload going, whoa, what do all of my pieces do again? And yes, you have these very, very handy cards for all of the monsters, but also your kind of like a cheat sheet as well for both of yours and your opponent's pieces. So that's helpful, but it still kind of makes you go, the saving grace of that being that it's only used once in the game. So sometimes you're like, okay, I'm going to save that to later, or for me, it's always a matter of like, am I keeping track of what, is Amy going to suddenly win without me realizing? Because I'm not really tracking what her pieces' powers are.
Yeah, and I don't usually like games that have a lot of card powers, but I did find that they were fairly simple. And I think, as Maggie said, because you use them once, it doesn't feel like I have to constantly keep track of this other, the other player's 6 different powers that they have going on at once. So it's a lot simpler than that, which I really appreciated. The other thing I wanted to mention is this is not the deluxe edition of the game. This is the regular edition, but it's really nice. It's got little standees. It's got little wooden tokens as well, and they are really satisfying because you're constantly playing with those. So it's really nice that they made those wood. And also there are a couple of expansions in the box. I didn't quite like the gate expansion very much, but I did like the extra monster and god cards that gave you end game conditions. So I think those are available separately.
Very dangerous for me because I always move myself into a position where it's like Amy's like, I won immediately. I'm like, oh, come on. Now, one thing I was actually not expecting, and I was pleasantly surprised by, was for a game that's this abstract, the actual powers that every god and monster has is actually fairly well thought out in terms of linking it thematically to that character's story. So like Cerberus, for example, the multi-headed, like the 3-headed hound, the power is to get rid of 3 of your opponent's tokens and replace it with your own. And then you have Poseidon, which is all about destroying, essentially eliminating all the tokens from one row or column, which is very like, I'll send the flood or I'll send a tsunami. So I actually did enjoy those couple of links.
Now, I think for what this game sets out to achieve, it pretty much does it. It does what it says on the tin. But there was a couple of things that I'd like to change about this game. Probably one, it outstays its welcome a little bit. It runs quite long. It says 40 minutes on the box, which even if that is true, you can stick to 40 minutes. That's quite a long, abstract 2-player head-to-head kind of game. It feels like it wears a bit thin. I wish it was about a third shorter.
Yeah, I think I really struggle with when you get to that point where it's literally just back and forth and you feel like you're just in this limbo where it's like this might never end. Well, I'm just going around taking your tokens and then next turn you're kind of coming around giving them all the way back. So that was a bit tricky.
And the second thing that's been mentioned, which has been more of a problem for some people than us, is that the monsters are slightly overpowering the gods. And I would agree that across all the games we played, the person playing as the monsters was more likely to win, but it wasn't impossible to win as the gods. It just felt like a slightly tougher challenge, which, is why they probably recommend in the rulebook to play 2 games and swap characters. But then you've always got that slight advantage, which I'd prefer them to be more balanced, but, it was okay in our household. We didn't realize until a few games in where we were like, hang on.
But when we did the math, I was like, wait a second,
the monsters are always winning. So now let's talk about whether either of them are staying in our collection. My rating for Ichor is also 7.4, even though I evaluate the games quite differently. For me, this one is fast and tactical, but it lacks the strategy that I really like in an abstract game. And Ichor, I like the mechanics of it so much more, but then it's a bit long and it just kind of gets a bit tedious sometimes. And so for that reason, they both kind of net out around the same for me. How about you?
So for me, Ichor I would actually put at a lower, so a 6.5. And a big part of that was this sense of, as I was talking about before with Iliad, it's like there's a very clear tempo and progression and you know when the game is going to end. Here, you genuinely don't know if this game will ever end.
It's more like a game of chess.
It kind of can get into that point where it's like you just have two characters chasing each other. Not that you get a lot of elimination of characters, but it's still, I really didn't enjoy that. And even just that constant, okay, like I'm gonna take these pieces, giving them back to you. I didn't really get that sense of progress along the way. So I don't think, it's not, obviously, and they're both very, very abstract, so they never really had high hopes of making it onto my shelf.
Yeah, and that they didn't have a high chance of getting onto my shelf, because my shelf is Maggie's shelf, and I always need an opponent to play with, so there is very limited room in our collection for abstract games, and so I have to really focus in on the ones that I love, like the Devon and the Shobu and all of those games that I have this emotional attachment to, but I really have enjoyed my time with these, and honestly, they'll probably stick around our house a little bit longer for me to play, don't worry, for me to play with my friends who like abstract games, just so they can get a sense of it too, but probably ultimately we'll move these on. But I'm really looking forward to what comes next in the Mythos collection. If you enjoyed this review, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.